From the Alvin and Rosalie Sarachek studio, PBS Kansas presents Kansas Week.
The numbers may not sound big, but the picture is. Homelessness in Kansas is on the rise, and it's affecting all of us, from those struggling to keep their lives together to communities trying to deal with the problem. What's causing this increase, and what can we do about it? Helping both those left sleeping on the streets and the greater community. That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. And welcome to the special single episode topic of Kansas Week. I'm your host, Pilar Pedraza. Today, we tackle an issue that's costing Kansans millions of dollars in taxpayer money every year, and some their lives. That doesn't even touch the peace of mind and safety concerns for those left to survive without a home. Every year, the United Way of the Plains takes part in the national point-in-time count of homeless in Wichita. This year, 702 people identified as homeless. That's up almost 2% from last year. Though most still lived in emergency shelters, transitional housing, or safe havens, those considered unsheltered, living on the streets, rose by 21%. Last year, the average days of homelessness per person was 41. Statewide, just over 8% of Kansans are experiencing some level of homelessness. A federal study in 2017 reported without connections to the right types of care, the unhoused cycle in and out of hospital emergency departments and inpatient beds, detox programs, jails, prisons, and psychiatric institutions, all at public expense. Some studies have found that leaving a person to remain chronically homeless costs taxpayers as much as $30,000 to $50,000 a year. Nationwide, about 30% of people without homes are now experiencing what's called chronic patterns of homelessness, meaning they've been without shelter for more than 12 months or have experienced extended periods of homelessness over the last 3 years. 60% of those experiencing homelessness are male, though the number of unhoused women and girls is now on the rise. And more than a quarter of the homeless were with their families and children. And joining us this week to tackle such a big topic, we have a panel made up of Wichitans who are fighting the fight against homelessness every day, including Wichita City Councilwoman Maggie Ballard, Sedgwick County Commissioner Ryan Beatty, and Erica Davis with Humankind Ministries and Brandy Niblett with the city's housing department. And just to be clear, we don't have any volunteers here because really when it came to setting this show up, sure, I reached out to Wichita's Homeless Task Force. While this is a statewide problem, Wichita has really been kind of leading the fight, perhaps, shall we say, because it's really the biggest city. Mm-hmm. So as we begin to look at this problem, before you can fight a problem, you got to understand it. So I'm going to start with each of you from your perspectives as you've been working with the task force, as you've been trying to help folks get off the street. What do you see as the scope? What is the problem we're dealing with homelessness today? Brandy, let's start with you.
I would definitely say that we're in the city of Wichita, we've got a crisis. We've had some recent shelters that have closed, causing those individuals to be forced out to the streets. So we're definitely seeing an increase in our number of unsheltered individuals on the streets and a lack of that affordable housing within our community that folks can move into and be able to afford. I'd say another issue that we have is that supportive housing. Mm-hmm. So lack of that more supportive housing that will provide those long-term supports for individuals who are struggling either with mental health or substance abuse and that need that additional support in order to maintain their housing. Those are definitely some struggles that we're seeing right now.
Erica, what about you?
I would definitely agree with Brandy. What we're seeing in the numbers have shown as 702 on the day of point-in-time count. We had 500 shelter beds available. So that leaves 200 individuals on the street at that time that did not have shelter. So there's definitely a lack of shelter beds in our community. We are seeing the lack of affordable housing as well, and those having the ability to access housing that is available. And we are most definitely in a crisis right now. And I'm very excited to have this conversation today to really dive into how we can address it.
And of course, things are going to look different from the political seats that you two hold. So what are you guys seeing, Ryan?
Well, what we're seeing, I think crisis is an understatement now. When you start to see the incremental increases, and it's very visible, particularly for those that are in downtown Wichita. It's very visible, the crisis that we're seeing. It's not just downtown Wichita, and it's not just those that are experiencing mental health and substance use. UST 259 released some data at a previous homelessness task force that they suspect that up to 1,400 kids in the school district are unhoused or unsheltered. Now, not necessarily living chronically on the streets, but living in shelters, living in cars, living on couches, living with grandparents in transition seasons. So this is a crisis. These are human beings. These are people. And I believe that we have not just an economic interest to try to solve this problem, we have a moral imperative in this community. The soul of this community, in my opinion, is at stake, and what we do and how we treat those that are marginalized and those that are vulnerable. So it's a big deal. It's a big topic. I think everybody's finally, the attention is right squarely where it needs to be, and I'm anticipating some serious action here soon.
Maggie, what about you?
Well, I would agree with everything that has been said already. We are in a mental health crisis, substance abuse, addiction on every level possible. The lack of housing that we have, not just affordable housing, we need all kinds of housing all over. Price-wise, we also have several hundred people that have vouchers in hand with not enough landlords that are willing to accept the housing choice voucher, which is also known as Section 8. That is a huge problem too. So yeah, those are just a couple of the other issues that I see. Also, I think it's interesting that some of our homeless is getting a lot younger. So maybe some of them are aging out of the foster care system, and there's just not really a bridge, to help them transition like we should be providing. So we have lots of things to work on.
You kind of touched on it a little bit, a couple of you folks, I know, especially you, Ryan, that there's more than just folks living on the streets who are talking about the homelessness issue. What are the different issues, different living situations, I guess, let's be very specific, that really fall under this homelessness definition? Yeah,
I mean, Erica and Brandy might be better for that conversation because they are in the space of actually serving those in housing and those with shelter. But the broader angle of what we're experiencing here is a community problem. And there are social determinants of health that are influencing these outcomes. And if we could pull a lever and solve this thing tomorrow, I think people a lot smarter than us would have probably done this years ago. But this is a complex problem. It's going to require a community solution. Government does have a role, but so does our nonprofits. So do our faith community. So does our business community. So trying to collaborate all these pieces into one room sometimes isn't easy to do. But what we have here in this community is we have stakeholders and people that care. And they see the human element of this. And for the first time, since I can remember, not only do we have a community will, but we also have political will now, that we're not going to settle for human beings that are in these type of predicaments without bringing resources that can really help solve these problems.
So for you, what is constituted under this definition of homelessness?
I would say definitely those that are literally homeless, living on the streets, are characterized as unsheltered and homeless. We do have categories under HUD's definition of individuals who are imminently at risk of losing housing would also fall under that. And then, as you mentioned, chronic homelessness, those who have been on the street for 12 months or more, or who have had multiple episodes of homelessness over a period of time and have disabling conditions like mental health, other things like substance abuse, and physical health issues or domestic violence all fall under those categories.
And I'd have to agree. There's lots of different categories of homelessness. When we're talking housing, the specific category we look at is the HUD definition of homelessness, which is somebody who is literally homeless, whether it's on the streets, unsheltered, in a shelter bed somewhere, living in their vehicle, a place not meant for habitation is kind of that definition that HUD looks at for homelessness. And then you kind of have that McKinney-Vento when we talk about the school districts. They have a little bit more of a lenient definition of homelessness because they're looking at individuals who are what we refer to as doubled up. So they might have a home that they're living in, but it's not suitable for the family size. They're living in we've seen families that are living in a 2-bedroom home and there's, 14, 15 people in that home, which is definitely not adequate housing for those individuals.
And of course, lots of reasons behind all of these different setups. The first step to solving a problem is figuring out what's causing it. Why are so many Kansans falling in the unhoused category now?
I've been homeless. I've fought my way back. I've lost a limb just this past year.
The veteran population, of course, experiences things like PTSD, potentially substance abuse, and a variety of medical conditions that can be related to their service.
And I realized that, housing someone is the key. There was a study done that shows if you can get a homeless person off the street, it reduces those vagrancy issues and arrests by 84%.
So we realized we were going to need this component of congregate shelter as the first place, whether that's 3 in the morning or Sunday afternoon, a place that's open 24/7, that someone can come in, get out of the elements.
And as we look at that, and as I listen to all of those sound bites, one thing I hear over and over and over again is shortage of housing, trying to find places. And, I know we've done stories about just the housing market and how quickly houses are selling in Wichita, and that doesn't seem to be slowing down a whole lot, even though nationally it is. And this is really kind of your purview, Brandy.
Yeah, so housing is definitely a struggle we see. We've got, I can issue a housing voucher, a housing choice voucher to an individual who's experiencing homelessness, and that's one piece of the puzzle. They still have to be able to go out and find that housing that's going to be affordable for them, and a landlord that's going to be able to accept that voucher to be able to work with us so we can subsidize that housing. I know in the last year we've housed, I believe that's 272 individuals out of homelessness with a housing choice voucher since January of this year. So that's quite a few people, but I probably have another 180 out on the street right now shopping with a voucher, looking for housing and looking for that affordable housing piece that will accept the voucher and get them. So landlords who will accept that voucher work with us for our payment standards, because we can't just, it's government money. I wish we could accept the high rents that some of them have, but we can't. We have to have that affordable housing piece that will accept the voucher.
There's another angle to this too. So not only do the supply of housing and affordable housing is a problem, the county appraiser will tell you that he believes that we're down 35 to up to upwards of 50,000 homes in this community right now. That's the shortage. Aside from that, though, not only do we have the vouchers in Housing First and Shelter Plus Care and the Section 8, what we lack many times is the case managers to help people navigate the system. So imagine you're experiencing homelessness and you're already in crisis mode, and now you have to navigate a very complicated system. So we lack the number of case managers to help those people navigate a very complicated system, and that's another piece to this puzzle that we have to shore up.
Yes, I would say absolutely. It's complicated. Like, I work very closely with a lot of our case managers who are working with our individuals who are unsheltered, and even the case managers struggle with understanding all of the complexities that come with the program. So expecting our individuals who are in crisis to fully understand that
It's unreasonable.
it's a struggle.
And I would agree. What we see is individuals that have vouchers are out trying to find landlords, and they're competing for the same units as other individuals that are gainfully employed, have not had any barriers such as evictions or any other things that they're striving to. So if you present this to a landlord, they are going to pick the individual who does not have those barriers, that is not receiving vouchers. So we're seeing this over and over again and time after time. So it does definitely create issues for those that we serve, and most definitely case management is necessary to navigate all of these complex systems.
Oh, and I know the city has really worked to try and get more landlords on board with Section 8.
Yeah, we have several incentives. It's just really difficult. There's a lot of red tape, and some landlords don't want to mess with it, but we desperately are trying everything we possibly can. But ultimately, I think supply and demand, I would say, is probably the biggest hurdle. Like she mentioned, there's a lot of people looking for rentals, and some of the folks that have vouchers, unfortunately, have had some other issues in the past, and the landlords are going to weigh the odds and potentially take some of the other applications over our vouchers. So it is a huge problem. We can't build houses fast enough.
I know when it comes to homelessness, a lot of folks, they immediately think of mental illness, of substance abuse. How much of a role do those issues play in Kansas when we're talking about the unhoused?
They definitely do play a role, but it's not the primary role. I think
Absolutely.
it is most definitely something that many of those that are experiencing homelessness may deal with, but there are greater issues and more pertinent issues, such as having affordable housing, accessibility to housing, having supportive services to help get into those structures. Is it present? Most definitely, but I do not think it is the primary cause of homelessness is substance abuse and mental health.
Yeah, the root causes, understanding root causes is a big ingredient to getting us to what we call functional zero in this community, to where there's less people going into the homelessness space, there's more people coming out of the homeless space than coming into the homeless space, right? Did I get it right?
Correct.
Okay,
Yes.
good. So we've got to understand root causes. Mental health, substance use certainly are root causes, but as Erica said, that's not the only causes. Affordable housing is a big one. One that we don't talk about enough in this community is job security and economic health. Many people realize that economic challenges for families create incredible mental duress, and we have a significant portion of our community that are what we call rent-averse, which they are one bad paycheck away or a lack of a paycheck away from being on the street. So it's a complicated, complex problem that it's going to take a community effort to try to solve.
I find it interesting you talk about the employment issue at a time when the state is saying we have 2 available jobs for everybody who's looking for a job right now.
I know that data. I understand the data. There's a lot of factors that flow into this, but many times what we're forgetting is there are a lot of different determinants that influence these outcomes. We like to think that the crisis homeless situation is just those that have mental illness or just those that are experiencing substance addiction. That's not it. Now, many of the people that we see firsthand in downtown Wichita, those are the ones we see many times. But the influences of these things are much broader and much more complicated. And we can't strip away the humanity piece of this conversation. It's easy sometimes to look at it as a program or look at it as a number in a point in time count. These are people. These are human beings. And again, we have a moral imperative as a community to act and to work, throw as many resources as we can to help individuals that are in need.
Well, when we have a cause, now we can start looking at solutions. The city of Wichita has been working on that for a long time. Some programs have been out there for a decade or longer, others coming online right now. Here's a look at just a couple that are working right now.
What are you guys trying to do to get out of your homeless situation?
I passed the rehab course you helped me with.
You did?
I passed that. I ended up having a baby girl in February.
Okay.
It's the only team of its kind in the state.
The last thing we want to do is just push them around somewhere else.
Hoping to get people off the streets and out from under bridges like this one on Maple.
They might be scared of us. They think we're going to hem them up and write tickets and fines. That's a last resort for our team. We have 700 officers that do that. We're 4 officers that are just trying to do something a little different.
Different indeed. Not everyone who wears the badge scans sidewalks to help those who are living on them.
Start looking for an apartment, and I'm going to give you an affordable housing list.
But this team does.
We even pay the deposit, everything to help you get into a place, and then...
That sounds tremendous.
Yeah.
Not only with water.
Here to load up.
But also with words.
We have case managers now.
Officer Nathan Sweetall gets these community members what they need.
We're the largest city in the state, so we have a lot of resources. A lot of people end up homeless. They find themselves, here in Wichita.
Sometimes it starts with something as simple as an introduction.
Good to meet you, Larry. I'm Sarah.
For Sarah Lewick, when she's talking with a homeless person here in Wichita.
People sometimes need like a little bit of a warm-up before they're ready to talk about more intimate or vulnerable details of their life, which is totally understandable.
Kick News rode along with Lewick and the 2 others working with her on Project Hope. It is a federally funded joint outreach program between the Wichita Police Department and the city's housing office to reduce crime downtown involving homeless people, as well as getting them off the streets and into housing.
We do outreach almost every single week, sometimes multiple times a week.
Project Hope has been fully up and running since April.
I'm so sorry to wake you up like that.
In addition to the weekly contact, the city has also partnered with other local providers for larger scale outreach days, like on Wednesday.
That collaboration with other agencies in town, we're seeing that kind of work a lot better than we have in the past.
And that word collaboration, as I was researching this episode, I saw time and time again so many different programs like this that are up and running, have been up and running in the past, doing the same basic things over and over and over again, kind of copying each other almost. So we had lots of coverage here, and yet certainly other areas over here that were uncovered. That word collaboration really seems to be at the crux of finding a solution here. And that's where everybody here is a member or is a member of an organization that has a member on the task force. How has that changed the push towards finding a solution?
Well, I'll start by saying that the collaborative piece of it is we first had to come into agreement on approach. Is we all came into agreement as a community, that the stakeholders involved here, government, nonprofit, faith, community, business, that we're going to take what's called a housing first approach. Is temporary shelter, emergency shelter is an important piece of this puzzle, but it cannot be the end game. That is just one piece to bring people out of crisis, but the goal has to be getting them into housing. A housing first model that we can then wrap services around them to help treat some of the root causes that put them into homeless or an unhoused situation to begin with. So the collaborative piece began with an agreement in strategy and philosophy that we have a housing first community here.
And where has that brought us now? Where are we at with that?
I think we've come a long way in the years that I've worked in whether nonprofit or with the government and working with our homeless individuals in Wichita. I've seen a lot of improvements, especially I would say mostly in the last year. Seen a lot more movement towards that collaboration. One of the big pieces that we've recently started, and Project Hope was a big piece of getting this started, is we have outreach workers within all of our agencies, nonprofits that work with homeless, and they're going out every day doing individual outreach. But what we weren't doing was communicating with each other, and we weren't gathering that data that we really truly needed to be able to identify individuals who were out on the streets unsheltered. So last month we started our first coordinated outreach events within the community. So we bring together all of our agencies that are providing that outreach, bring them together for a day, almost like the point in time count, but we're targeting certain areas in Wichita. This week we were just out in West Wichita, right? Because we know that homelessness and those experiencing homelessness is not just downtown. So we were in West Wichita this last week. Next week when we go out, we'll be hitting South Wichita, which we know is where a lot of our larger encampments is in that South Wichita area. And the goal with that is we need to be able to go out and provide services to them instead of waiting for them to come walk in our doors at our shelters or walk and come to us. We need to be going out to them, providing those services and making sure that they are aware of what services are available and how they can get connected to those services.
And I think one thing that the task force has brought is we've had a continuum of care of service providers that have been working towards ending homelessness for years. The task force has brought new voices to the table, developers, people that are involved, political parties, all of this to the table to discuss homelessness and try to find a resolution. And because it's going to take a community effort to resolve this, not just homeless service providers can solve this. We need the community's support, and everyone needs to be a part of the solution. And I think that is the greatest thing that I've seen come out of the task force, is getting to hear everyone's voices and for them to understand the problem and really start trying to work on a resolution to the problem.
How have you guys seen collaboration work toward ending hopefully the issue, the concerns?
I think maybe for Brian and I mean, we've been talking about this for the last couple years, talking about it openly. I mean, we see it in the news all the time, and I think that's part of it. We're openly talking about it in conversations with all of our partners, because it is going to take city, county, state, federal. I mean, it's going to take all of us to make this happen, and that's why I think collaboration is so key, because we all bring something different to the table, and that's just what's going to make it work.
I'll make a bold statement that I've said many times, and I truly believe it, that I think where we're heading here in this community is the nation is going to look to our community one day and say, this is the gold standard of how a community collaborates together to solve problems. When you look at what, I'll list off a couple of things that we know is coming that we're doing. The mental health aspect of this is a big portion of it. Well, we have the state is doing a state mental health hospital right here in Sedgwick County. And we know that crisis intervention is a big piece of it. Sedgwick County's already allotted $15 million for a ComCare crisis expansion that will have substance use medical detox.
Which is huge.
Which is an enormous aspect of this. We know that congregate shelter, wraparound services, campus-like approach, something that's been needed here. Now the city of Wichita, in partnership with nonprofits, are doing what's called the multi-agency center, to where we will have this social service hub to where we can just not only house people in an emergency situation in non-congregate shelter, but then wrap services around them. So all these things are happening. And then the pipeline of social workers and other practitioners in the space, Wichita State and KU are partnering for a biomed school in downtown Wichita. So we have county, we have city, we have nonprofit, faith community, business community, state, academic, all collaborating, and all the legs of the stool are being fulfilled so that we can have an approach to really solve big problems in this community. I promise you, I think we'll be the gold standard nationally when people look to how a community collaborates together.
So we've got a lot of things in the works, but what do we not have in the works perhaps that we need to be thinking about? I know before the show you were talking about the foster care to jail, I guess, pipeline, and that certainly involves homelessness.
Yeah, foster care certainly does. I've seen some data that 1 out of 5 kids that age out of the foster care system will be unhoused in 1 year. That's significant. So we've got to be able to look upstream. I'll tell you what the biggest problem that we're facing is going to be. It's not ideas, it's not compassion, it's not organizations that want to help. The biggest barrier is going to be sustained funding. None of this is going to be cheap, and none of this is going to be inexpensive. It's sustained funding, and we've got to find some creative solutions to how we solve that problem.
I have a great idea. I have a great idea. Medicaid expansion is something that we desperately need so bad, and until our Kansas legislators want to get on board with that, we are leaving billions with a B dollars on the table. And until they want to have that conversation, I mean, we would be able to offer the services that we need and reimburse ourselves. And to me, that is a huge missing piece of the puzzle that we desperately need to be talking about and pushing our legislators for.
I think, if I may, that a lot of people in our community don't realize the cost of doing nothing and what it is. We had something called a high utilizer study that we looked at over a period of 3 years. Just 3 organizations, Ascension Via Christi, ComCare, and SAC, Substance Abuse Center of Kansas, spent $56 million on just 520 high utilizers of services in this community. It's significant.
And we're going to have to end on that note,
well, there
because
you go.
we are out of time, and that is an incredible number. Thank you so much for joining us. We'd also like to thank our news partners at Cake News, the Wichita Eagle, and KSN News for sharing their materials with us. Stay safe and have a great week.